Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents House Party Murder Rap, 1920s Historical Cozy Mystery, by Sonia Parin. Narrated by Pearl Hewitt. Chapter 1. Talk of the Town. Spring 1920. Hainsley Hall, Yarborough, Yorkshire. Lady Wainscott settled down to read the missive which had been delivered earlier that day. Her morning had been filled with last-minute preparations for that weekend's house party, and she'd only now managed to find time to attend to other matters. Her eyes widened with each word she read. "So it's true," she murmured to herself. "Evangeline Parker will be arriving this afternoon." Her lips pursed with obvious dissatisfaction. She had heard a rumour, but she hadn't thought it possible. Actually, she hadn't wanted to believe it. Not only had Evangeline Parker returned from her extended trip to America, but she had also decided to revisit the scene of her crime. This weekend of all weekends. Pressing her hand to her chest, Lady Wainscott drew in a sharp breath. With numerous guests arriving within the hour, she wouldn't be able to make the rounds and find out more. Succumbing to the feeling of utter defeat, her hand dropped to her lap. A second later, she perked up. She would send someone else to make inquiries and report back to her. Determined to take prompt action, she rang the bell. She had expected the butler to make an appearance, but instead the maid rushed in. She supposed it had something to do with the household being in an upheaval, as everyone rushed around, ensuring everything met her exacting standards. Surging to her feet, Lady Wainscott fussed with her skirt and, lifting her chin, she straightened into her trademark imperious pose. "Ruth, would you please tell the girls to come down this instant? I need to speak with them." "As you wish, milady." "Tell them to hurry," Lady Wainscott urged. "Yes, milady." As the maid turned to leave, another thought occurred. "Ruth, tell them they'll be riding to Yarborough Manor." The maid's brow furrowed slightly. "Well, go on." "Begging your pardon, milady, I just finished helping Miss Eugene into her new dress. It took forever to do all those little buttons up. She's not going to be pleased about having to change again, what with the guests arriving so soon." Lady Wainscott gave the maid a slight lift of her eyebrow, a sure sign of her displeasure and growing impatience. "Yes, milady, right away." As soon as the maid disappeared to deliver her instructions, Lady Wainscott drew in a calming breath and released it as a shuddering sigh. Evangeline Parker, here to ruin everything for her, again, over my dead body. The outskirts of Yarborough, Yorkshire. Evangeline's eyes fluttered open. It took her a moment to engage her mind. When she did, she emitted a light groan. They were trekking through the Yorkshire countryside, making their way to Yarborough Manor for the weekend house party, one of many events in the county organised as a season opener. If given the choice, she would much rather have stayed at the London house, enjoying her semi-reclusive lifestyle. However, after 2 months of limiting her social outings to a few dinners and afternoon teas, she had run out of excuses, and so she had sat down to go through the invitations which had begun pouring in the moment she had returned to London. She wished news about her return to England hadn't spread quite so quickly. In her opinion, this only gave rise to speculation about her reasons for returning, assumptions she could do without, since they would all, no doubt, focus on her marital status. "If only people would simply let it go," she mouthed. 10 years before, in the spring of 1910, she had first set foot on English soil as a spirited debutante, urged by her mamma to make the best of her season, and learned herself a titled gentleman. As a young girl, Evie had travelled the length and breadth of her homeland, including little-known tracts of wilderness, and had been eager to experience something vibrantly new. Unfortunately, she had been disappointed. Instead of the excitement she had yearned for, she had found everyone and everything in England deeply steeped in old traditions and rules, more than she had ever encountered, Evie thought. Feeling stifled, she had pleaded with her mamma to take her back home, all to no avail. Then, to her surprise, she had fallen in love, and she had remained in love until destiny had dealt her a hard, cruel hand. Everything had been altered. She had become a widow. Her first instinct had been to flee back home to America and stay there, but after 2 years of being cocooned in familiar surroundings, she had made the firm decision to return to England. She had as yet to determine if this had been the right step to take. While she'd had plenty of time to get used to her new status as a single woman and to overcome the pain of her loss, which everyone had promised would subside in due course, she knew the memories would surely surge to the surface again. Such is life, she thought, and switched her attention to the here and now. She supposed it would be fabulous to catch up with Bicky. Albert Brenton, Duke of Hetherington, Bicky to his close friends and family, had been her husband's oldest friend. He of all people would understand why she'd chosen to stay away. "Tom?" "Yes, ma'am?" "I slept like a log. The last time I came out to Yorkshire, the driver hit every pothole along the way. You are marvellous." "Thank you, ma'am." Evie pressed her lips together to stop herself from correcting him. Tom Winchester had been in her employ for 2 months, and he still insisted on calling her ma'am, but at least he had stopped using her title. She hoped she hadn't confused the situation by not providing him with an alternative form of address. For now it would have to be ma'am, at least until she settled on something less formal. How would she feel if her chauffeur called her Evie? Of course, despite protocol, she hadn't thought twice about embracing a first-name practice. In reality, she should have addressed her chauffeur as Winchester, but Evie preferred Tom. And in this instance, she wished to have her way, something that seemed to be happening with increasing regularity, she couldn't help thinking. During her recent journey back home to America, she had allowed all the formalities that accompanied her life in England to lapse. Perhaps a part of her had hoped Tom would help her maintain it by adopting a more casual approach. It would certainly be a lovely bridge between the life she led and the life she yearned for. Surely that had been her grandmother's intention when she arranged for Tom to become her chauffeur and travel back to England with her. "Tom, have you ever lived in the country?" "On occasion, ma'am." Evie waited for him to provide more information, but it seemed where his private life was concerned, he would remain a closed book. Not if she had her way. "Tom, I believe we are now travelling through the Duke's land. Have you ever seen anything so vast?" Tom appeared to weigh his words before responding. "Yes, ma'am, in Texas, although this is much greener." Surprised to hear more than a yes or no answer, Evie smiled. The distraction she had sought did not last. A sense of trepidation swept through her. The last time she had travelled this way, she had been blissfully happy. Closing her eyes, she recalled her granny's warning to brace herself, because in her opinion, Evie's return would be seen as throwing down the gauntlet, so she shouldn't be surprised when the reprisals began shooting her way. Young, wealthy, titled, and available. Yes, some people would perceive her presence as flaunting her availability. However, they would be wrong. She had no intention of marrying again. Ever. Chapter 2. The Red Sox versus the Yankees. "How are you enjoying the scenery, Tom? I believe this is your first trip to the English countryside." Several seconds ticked by before Tom answered. "It's a pleasant change from London, ma'am." Yes, she would have to agree. A few days away from the busy and frenetic activities of town living would do her a world of good. At least, she hoped so. "Tom." "Yes, ma'am." "Do you miss home?" "I can't say that I do, ma'am." "Really?" Whenever she came across someone from her neck of the woods, all they could talk about was how much they missed just about everything, which made her wonder why they ever bothered making the long transatlantic journey. "Do you follow any games, Tom?" Evie asked, although she already knew the answer. However, if she didn't encourage a conversation, he would quite happily drive the rest of the way in complete silence. "Baseball, ma'am." "Let me guess. You're a Yankees fan." Leaning slightly forward, Evie saw his jaw muscles clench. "Red Sox, ma'am." "Oh, I beg your pardon," she said lightly. "My mistake. Of course I'd forgotten. You originally hail from Boston." She tried to hide her smile. Her tone filled with innocence as she said, "I'm partial to the Yankees. I wonder, is this going to affect our working relationship?" His jaw muscles twitched again. "I don't see why it should, ma'am." Of course it wouldn't, but she couldn't help predicting many lively conversations. It had only been a few months since the Red Sox had shipped Babe Ruth to the Yankees in exchange for crisp stacks of redeemable U.S. currency. Many fans had been aghast that such a talent would be cast off, while others had welcomed the change in favor of a more cohesive team rather than a one-man show. Their loss, and the Yankees' win, Evie thought. "You'll have to keep me informed, Tom. Sometimes I become so immersed in the society pages I don't find the time to get to the sports coverage." Evie wondered if this would help lower the barrier he seemed so intent on maintaining. She hoped it would. Leaning forward slightly, she said, "We're coming up to the village now. I want to point out the pub." When her granny had asked her to look after Tom, Evie had taken the request to heart, so she had sent a message ahead to organize a room for Tom at the local pub. Servants working in large estates were used to guests bringing their own staff, but Evie had heard too many stories about servants imposing their stalwart rules of etiquette and strict class system. Knowing Tom had never worked in service before, and having her own 2 pennies' worth of opinions about the often tedious snobbery of drawing-rooms, she had decided to spare him the hierarchical downstairs experience. Pointing ahead, she said, "There it is, the Bow and Arrow." She caught sight of his small smile. "It's a quaint name, and rather a pleasant change from the usual Royal Arms or Queen's something or other. Then again, being new to England, you might not have noticed the practice of giving pubs rather engaging names." "Actually, I have noticed, ma'am. In fact, I was thinking of the Hang Drawn and Quartered, or the I Am the Only Running Footman pubs, both in London." "Oh, yes. That one is in Charles Street, Mayfair, and you're right. There are some unusual names." She tapped her chin and tried to recall a few names she'd encountered during her various jaunts around the countryside. The Cases Altered in Middlesex and the Bucket of Blood in Cornwall come to mind. She settled back into her seat. "I believe you will find the Bow and Arrow quite comfortable." "I'm sure I will, ma'am." He cleared his throat. "I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but are you sure you want to dispense with my services during your stay, ma'am?" "Yes, quite sure. These type of house parties are well orchestrated. There will be lunches and dinners and in between walks and rides and perhaps some shooting, all taking place within the estate, so you see you can enjoy a nice vacation." As they entered the village, Tom slowed down to an appropriate speed. In previous years, Evie had been a regular guest at Yarborough Manor, the Duke of Hetherington's family seat. In fact, she had met her husband at one of Becky's house parties. After her marriage, there had been a number of times when they had enjoyed extended visits, and Evie had often wandered around the small village, acquainting herself with some of the locals. "Tom, could you please stop the car? I'd like to drop in on Marceline's Salon de Beauté. They stock the most wonderful primrose-scented soap. At least, I hope they still do. I'd like to place an order." Evie recalled Marceline's Salon de Beauté's humble beginnings, selling anything and everything from dresses to locally made soaps, as well as the emerging ladies' beauty care products. Now, it seemed, they had revamped the business, seemingly aspiring to cater to a more exclusive clientele. But in reality, netting their business from any female intent on staving off the ravages of time. Evie strode across the square, stopping a couple of times to give way to vehicles. The last time she had visited the village, motor vehicles had been a rare sight. She spotted a horse and cart outside a store, and made a point of committing the image to memory, since she doubted she would see many more in the future. Along the way she exchanged smiles with the local villagers she encountered, even though she failed to recognize most of them. It didn't surprise her to see new faces, as the last couple of years had introduced many changes, with people moving to different towns or large cities. She had heard say some people had abandoned their lives of service and had moved on to more lucrative jobs in stores or factories. A man tipped his hat at her. Another one stopped to let her through. She saw a man standing by Marceline's salon, the sleeve of his coat pinned up. A war casualty, Evie thought. A moment later, a lady emerged from the store, and joining him, they strode away together. When she entered the store, a delicate doorbell announced her entrance. "Lady Woolridge!" the young woman behind the counter exclaimed. Evie gave her a warm smile. "Hello, Anna. You look splendid. I love your new hairstyle." The last time she'd seen her, Anna had just started out in the store and had worn her hair in braids twisted and gathered into a neat bun. Now she sported the current Parisian rage, a fashionable bob with neat rows of delicate waves. "Anna, I would like to order some of your lovely primrose soap. Do you still carry it?" "Yes, indeed, m'lady. Would you like it sent up to the house?" "Yes, please. I'm spending a few days at Yarber Manor," Evie confirmed. Anna nodded. "I'll send the delivery boy out this afternoon." Thanking her, Evie turned to leave when she noticed an eye-catching display. "Oh, what are these?" Anna picked up one of the tubes and presented it with a flourish. "Cupid's Bow, a new shade by Helena Rubinstein, offering perfectly curved lips with professional deftness." "What a marvellous shade! Include one of those too, please." "Certainly, m'lady." Evie couldn't help noticing Anna's subtle gesture toward a sign on the counter, and wondered if she had employed the same subtle tactic to draw her attention to the lipstick. "Day Beauty Care?" Evie asked, her voice filled with awe. "Is that a new service?" "Yes, indeed." "By appointment only," Evie read. "I wouldn't mind trying it." Before her journey to England she had stopped for several days in New York, and had indulged in a day of beauty at Helena Rubinstein's main salon. It had done wonders for her complexion, or so she'd been told. Her face had certainly felt pampered after the treatment. "I'll send word later on with a suitable time. Or perhaps I could decide now. Would tomorrow be too soon?" Anna drew out an appointment book, and, taking the greatest care, wrote Evie's name. As she watched her, Evie sensed she had drawn the attention from another customer in the store. Turning slightly, Evie studied the woman. It took her a moment to place the lady who stood near a display of face creams, casting furtive glances her way. Lottie Browning, married to the local solicitor. Her father had been a baron, and she had aspired to marry a titled gentleman, but after several failed seasons she had given up, and had accepted Mr. Browning's humble proposal. According to the rumour mills, Mrs. Lottie Browning would continue to hold on to her aspirations until the day she died. To Evie's surprise, Lottie bobbed a curtsy. To her even greater surprise, Lottie then scurried out of the store. Smiling, Evie returned her attention to the young salesgirl. "It seems I have been away too long, but it's lovely to be back." Content with her purchases, Evie strode out of the store. As she crossed the square again, she noticed Lottie Browning standing nearby, looking at a store window, or rather, pretending to look, while her attention clearly remained pinned on Evie. Nothing but curiosity, Evie thought, determined she would not let it bother her, even though she had heard rumours about Lottie Browning's stalwart objections to Evie's marriage. Many had shared her sentiments. In fact, to Evie's astonishment, the news had caused ripples of discontent right across the county's drawing-rooms and beyond. About to reach the car, Evie noticed a man staring at her. When she met his gaze, he pushed off and strode away, his pace hurried. It seemed she had attracted the attention of more than one person, she thought. Lottie Browning remained standing by the store window, which made Evie wonder what she could find so enthralling. She smiled at Tom. "I'll only be another moment." A few steps brought her up to the store, holding Lottie Browning's attention. Farm equipment? Evie continued on and entered the store next door. Moments later she emerged with a small bag of mints. Lottie Browning saw her coming out, and swiftly looked away. Humming a tune under her breath, Evie returned to the car and offered Tom a mint. He shook his head and thanked her. "Go on, have one." Relenting, Tom took one and held the door open for her. Evie settled into the car, and they were promptly on their way again, driving through the quaint village until they were once again in the open road, admiring the lush green hills of the Yorkshire countryside. As she gazed out at the meadows, Evie thought about Lottie. She would no doubt be making haste and rushing to inform as many people as she could about the notorious Evangeline Parker's arrival in the country. Evie knew very few people, if any, would bother to use her rightful title when gossiping about her, although they would display all manner of politeness while out in public. As she gazed out the passenger window, Evie thought she caught sight of a glint of light reflected from within the copse of trees lining the road. "Tom, I think bird-watchers are out and about. I have an uncle who is as migratory as the birds he chases around the country. He simply adores his hobby." The car moved along the winding road and onto a clearing where she saw the flash of light reflected again. Evie guessed she had become the birdwatcher's new interest, and imagined the person rushing home to declare he had personally witnessed the arrival of that Parker woman. She was about to look away when she saw a flock of birds taking flight, squawking as they flew off in an obvious state of panic. A concerned look crossed Evie's face. She leaned forward, only to be jerked back when the car suddenly jolted. In the next instant, the car swerved. "Get down!" Tom shouted. At the same time his hand shot out, his palm extended, as if to block something. He grabbed hold of the steering wheel and brought the car to a halt, by some miracle managing to avoid rolling into a ditch by a mere few inches. Tom swung around to look at her. "Are you all right, ma'am?" "Yes." Evie straightened and adjusted her hat. "What happened?" Instead of answering her, Tom jumped out of the car. He rushed from one end of the vehicle to the other. Evie imagined he wanted to inspect the tires for possible damage. When he finished, he jumped in and got them moving again, although not at the sedate pace they'd been travelling at. Instead, the car moved at full speed. Evie held on for dear life. She barely had time to notice Yarborough Manor coming into view before they sped past the gatehouse and along the long driveway. "Tom!" Evie exclaimed. Leaning forward, he looked about. Yarborough Manor sat in the middle of an expansive park, but Tom's attention appeared to be spread toward the copse of trees in the distance. He finally brought the car to a stop in front of the impressive porticoed entrance, and after a few moments his hands released their hold on the steering wheel, and he sat back, saying, "I'm sorry about that, ma'am. The sun hit my eyes and I've lost control of the vehicle." The sun? When he turned, he looked at her with steady eyes, as he again apologized and promised it would never happen again. The sun hit his eyes? Evie stared right back at him and wondered why he had just lied to her. Chapter 3. House guests should never arrive bearing ill tidings. Yarborough Manor, the Duke of Hetherington's country estate. Feeling more stunned than shaken, Evie said, "Whatever happened out there had nothing to do with the sun hitting your eyes." Tom turned slightly. His blue eyes, made more intense by dark lashes, lifted, the visor from his chauffeur's cap casting a slight shadow over them. After a moment he murmured, "I don't wish to alarm you, ma'am, but I think it would be a good idea if I stayed here instead of at the pub." Trying to settle her thoughts, as well as her thumping heart, Evie murmured, "We'll talk about it later." She wanted to say guests did not arrive at the Duke of Hetherington's manor house in a state of panic, but held her tongue for fear she might entice him to break with protocol and damn propriety to hell and back. She couldn't say for sure, but something told her Tom Winchester would set aside his role as the Countess of Woodridge's chauffeur and show his true colours if pushed too far. She knew her granny had entertained a secret agenda when she'd suggested employing Tom as her driver, and Evie had even suspected him of serving a role far beyond that of chauffeur. Bodyguard came to mind. After all, she had already inherited 2 fortunes and stood to inherit several more. She watched him lower his eyes and take a deep swallow. Oh yes, Evie thought, guarded and well contained. When he lifted his gaze toward her again, she gave a stiff nod. "Actually, wait around. I will send Caro down with a message." That should give her enough time to settle the events in her mind. She really didn't wish to go into hysterics over something that might have been an accident or a silly prank, nor could she dismiss it as inconsequential. "Yes, ma'am." When Tom emerged from the vehicle and held the door open for her, Evie hesitated for a moment. Something had happened on the road. She hadn't heard a gunshot, but if someone had fired from a distance, she might not have heard it. She looked toward the entrance and saw the butler and a footman waiting at attention. The importance of adhering to protocol had been drummed into her well before she'd set sail for England all those years ago, as a bright-eyed debutante. Set a foot wrong, and news about it would spread like wildfire. How could she raise the alarm when she didn't know exactly what had happened? Tom certainly knew more than he wanted to say. Giving another firm nod, she decided she would talk to him later, after she'd had a talk with her host. Evie fixed her smile in place and strode toward the entrance, just as the Duke of Hetherington, Bicky to his close friends, emerged, all smiles and good cheer. "Evie, my darling, how absolutely marvellous it is to see you after such a long time. How long has it been?" "Too long, Bicky. I have missed you." The Duke of Hetherington turned to his butler. "Larkin, please see to the Countess's luggage." The butler bowed his head. "As you wish, your Grace." Evie glanced back at Tom and found him staring at her. "Are you all right?" Bicky asked. "Yes." Evie held her hand to her chest. She needed a moment to settle more than her thoughts. Stepping inside Yarborough Manor had always given Evie a sense of the grand scale the so-called cottages back home in Newport aspired to emulate. Massive columns flanked the entrance with the marble floors spreading all the way to the grand staircase that led to rooms fit for royalty. The sumptuous ballroom with its sparkling chandeliers and priceless works of art, as well as the dining room, were to the right, and the library, billiards room, and various sitting rooms and drawing rooms were situated at the opposite end. Evie knew the house had been a gift from a monarch given in gratitude for a battle won in the 1500s. Along with the house there had also been the creation of the title. These days, she thought, someone would be lucky to get a medal for valour. "I suppose you'll want to settle in," Bicky said, in his jovial manner. "Yes. Even with a new car, the drive over didn't feel any shorter. I know I could have travelled by train, but I knew I wanted to stop along the way to pick up a few essentials, and the scenery is something I had looked forward to enjoying." "When you're ready, join me in the blue drawing-room," Bicky invited. The butler cleared his throat and led the way up the grand staircase. Evie strode up, removing her gloves one finger at a time, while her eyes wandered over to the tapestries and paintings adorning the walls. She silently smiled, as she recalled her mother's remark when she had travelled to England.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?